Teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing you've heard a student say? A kid missed his bus home and had an absolute meltdown. Eventually it came out that his dad told him that if he missed the bus again, he'd hold his head underwater even longer this time. Was a Nate in a guidance office. The most disturbing was a kid we'll call Tyler. He had severe social adjustment issues and tended to say things that creeped people out. One day, he comes in wanting to talk to a counselor. I was playing receptionist that day and told him I'd let them know, and asked what was up. He very blankly says, "I tried to walk out into traffic yesterday." This was obviously alarming, so I brought him straight to one of their offices. He repeats what he told me, and this counselor says, "You need to come back later, I'm working on college admission stuff for other students." He just kind of sighed and left. I once had a piano student who said he couldn't practice at home because his stepfather would beat him to have to listen to it. I had a student who was sweet and innocent to adults. However, when alone with other kids he would curse at them and manipulate them to do his bidding. When the other students would complain, the student would act innocent and deflect anything that was said to him. I couldn't prove anything when I expressed my concerns to Mom. Mom played the victim. One day, however, I introduced Flipgrid, a video recording service for assignments, to which the student went on video and started spewing racial slurs to another student. On video, this boy exposed himself. I sent the video to our principal. Mom gets called in to have a conference. Mom plays the victim again, about his behavior. The student gets transferred shortly after. Coached elementary PE. Had a 9-year-old student call me an infested tampon sucker, more surprised than angry. At the time I was 23 and never heard an insult like that. I had a girl tell me her father had raped her from the age of 3 to 7. She started out difficult and by the time she graduated we had formed a great bond. I was teaching a high school jewelry/metal shop class and some students alerted me to one student trying to sneak out some of the metal files. When confronted, he said he wanted to use them to stab people in the halls. I had him removed permanently, to say the least. My mom's a teacher and she says there was a student that used to make these little paper drug packets and he didn't even know what they were. She says that the mother was a drug dealer and would make him make them all day long if he wasn't in school. Safe to say the police were involved after certain things happened, like her never turning up to the school to collect him one night and other stuff. Pretty weird how a child was making literal drug packets and had no idea. He was just proud of them because that was the only thing he was taught how to do at home. A student once told me he was going to burn his house down. We talked about how that would ruin his house and how he could possibly hurt his mom and dad or himself. His reply was, "I'd make sure my mom was dead before I burn it down." This kid is 8. Edit, thanks for all the upvotes. I work as a special education teacher, specifically with students who are emotionally disturbed or have other disorders that impact their behavior. This isn't even the most messed up thing I've heard. Just one of the most memorable. Also, for those of you wondering about the possibility of abuse, I truly do not believe he is being abused. He has been my student for several years and it's not uncommon for him to make disturbing statements. In fact, if I had $1 for every time he told me he was going to poison or stab someone, I would almost have enough money to fully fund my classroom. I had a student tell me about his parents leaving salt around the house. Bizarre, but I didn't connect the dots until they were arrested. Turns out, that was cocaine. Trying to convince a 17-year-old student that drugs are not the way to go and that he has a full life ahead of him when he says, "Doesn't matter. I'm gonna be dead or in jail by the time I'm 25. He had been told he was nothing his whole life and he absolutely believed it. Spent up until he graduated trying to prove him wrong. Edit, oh goodness, thank you kind Redditors for the awards. Unfortunately, I have since left teaching at that school and don't have a way to contact him. Last we talked, he was thinking of trade school. When I was student teaching elementary art, I was on crutches from a recent knee surgery. We were doing clay and I was staying close to a particularly violent kid. They were using rolling pins to roll out slabs and this kid was hitting other kids. I kept shielding the kids trying to get the thing out of his hand. When he finally tried to throw it, pretty badass honestly, I snatched it out of midair and was trying to put distance between us and scolding the kid. Kid turns to me and yells, "I'll break your other leg," and kicks me in my bad leg. Kid was 7 years old. Edit, so that's what it's like to have a comment blow up. Thanks for the kind words, folks. To those saying you drop-kicked the kid, I get you. But in reality it's not the kid's fault. It's his world that failed him, parents, family, society. Sadly, the kid will most likely become a statistic. Young, African American males are often seen as an unjustifiable threat, but when you throw years of learned confrontation and violence into the mix, they never stand a chance. It's hard to help kids who you only see at school, or in my case only see once a week. It's a sad situation that's gotta get fixed at the systemic level. Vote for people. WHO care about people. To those concerned about my leg, the kid only kicked it half-heartedly. He knew he messed up, threatened and attacking an adult. I think he was more surprised I didn't beat the SHD out of him for saying that. One of my students threatened to kill my dog while I was out walking her. This was after he had cussed me out, ripped up his work, and disturbed the class. It was his second day in class. One of my students' parents were fighting. Dad left home then came back to talk. They went out to the car to fight so the kids wouldn't hear. He shot and killed the mother then himself. The girl came to school the next day and just said, I have nowhere else to go. Oh, so many. Frown. A kid came in upset and we finally got out what the problem was. This mom told him that he caused her to miscarry because he was such a mess up. Another kid came to school acting off. By lunchtime, he finally told someone that his dad got arrested the night before. The dad made him take off his clothes and beat the SHT out of him with an electrical cord. The kid ran outside into the streets of Detroit, naked. Thank God a nice older man found him, put him a blanket on him and took him to the police. Dad got arrested and of course CPS got involved. CPS was looking for a replacement. Kid assumed he would stay with his aunt, dad's sister, but learned that wasn't possible because that guy wasn't his dad. So within a day, kid got SHT beaten out of him, found out his dad wasn't his real dad, put into foster care. Kid said something like, "My whole life is over." He was 10. I heard a student say to another teacher who was pregnant at the time, "I hope your baby dies." And the really sad part? She had a miscarriage a few weeks later. It was horrifying. Edit, wow, this really blew up. So the teacher is okay. She ended up getting pregnant again and having a beautiful baby. As for the student, he, obviously, has some pretty severe behavior problems related to trauma. After several long-term suspensions, the district decided our school wasn't a good fit for him and sent him to a special school for kids with behavioral disabilities. He, 6th grade, came to school with a bruised face and told me he got pistol whipped and his dad got murdered the week before. This kiddo cried in my arms. I let him sit in my class with his head down all day. He missed school for a bit a couple weeks later and I was worried sick. His girlfriend told me he was in juvie for weed. It kept happening but substances got harder. I think about that baby all the time. By 7th grade he was too hard to open up to me and we didn't keep in touch. I think about him and his girlfriend, another favorite student, constantly. It wasn't a student, but his father. A guy came up to me on parents' night and told me to call him if his kid needed a good yelling, since his kid was such a useless mess up. While I stood there in shock, he added, "He's always been lazy, but he's been worse since his roommate at his last school killed himself. Don't hesitate to call me if he pulls that bullshit." We saw our neighbor die last night. Completely deadpan. Me, oh my goodness. What happened? Are you okay? Them. He was racing his lawnmower and it dragged him to death. It went really fast. Me, are you okay? Would you like to talk to the counselor? Them, nah, we're fine. We've seen it before. Them equals twin 7th grade boys in the Ozarks of the southern Midwest, USA. During a class field trip, a girl in class casually mentioned before everybody that the road we were driving down was the same one she'd tried to kill herself on the year before because she was bullied so badly. She said she'd been driving in Florida, hoping to hit a tree, only to change her mind because she didn't want to hurt her family. It just came out of nowhere, and from the girl who was generally considered incredibly popular, kind, and well-liked. I have a student who is constantly accusing the adults in the room of hurting him and insulting him and swearing at him. And he isn't joking. He fully believes these things are happening, despite none of these things happening. And if you tell him that no one is hurting him or swearing at him, he will glare at them with absolute vitriol and tell, "Yes you did, you pushed me and said the F word." There is no convincing him otherwise. This student is 4 years old. Edit. Okay, I did not expect this to blow up this much and I'm not able to respond to everyone. I'll answer the most common questions here. Schizophrenia? Could be. We don't think it is. But we aren't qualified to make a diagnosis and nothing is off the table. Has he gotten help? As if right now, no. That's what we're working on. It's also difficult because the family has no transportation and specialists aren't entering schools due to COVID. An appointment was made that they missed, but they asked to reschedule. So that's where we are now. Delusions? Hallucinations? We don't know. All we really know is how he acts when overwhelmed and the very likely causes of these reactions. While student teaching, had a student shout, "You guys want to see the gun in my backpack?" He was trying to joke, but security was called and the intervention specialist kept all students away from the bag. I had a student, under 10, tell me he wanted to cut my head off and watch me bleed. I had the audacity to tell him that he needed to put his crayons up before he could get his Play-Doh out. I had a student who had just moved to our school, 3rd grader. His first day he had this huge gash over his nose. I don't know why, but I just didn't think much of it. A couple days later I asked him what had happened and he said that his mom's boyfriend's dad pinned him against a wall and whipped him with his belt. Then showed me marks on his back as well. He kind of laughed it off and said, "Yeah, he's mean." It took every ounce of me not to cry right then and there. I immediately went next door to get an adult to take over my class and ran to the principal. She called the police and they had some kind of excuse why they wouldn't be able to come right away. She demanded they be there today because she was not sending that boy home. They did show up, they walked him home, and they watched as the boyfriend's dad packed up and left. The boy was in 3rd grade, had the dirtiest mouth, and was probably one of the funniest and sweetest kids I'd ever met. He did tell me that the man moved back to Samoa later that year. Mom stayed with boyfriend so knew stuff about the man. He moved schools the next year though, so I don't know how he's doing now. Paraprofessional in an elementary school. A kid looked at me and casually said my mom died Sunday. Her funeral is next week, and shrugged. 2nd grade teacher here. A student recently told me his parents have a vibrating bed. I had to hold back laughing. This one student once told me, unprompted, "I like red cars, because that's the color of car my mom used when she left us to do drugs." I was talking to 2nd graders about body parts. I explained that joints are what make your limbs move. 3 little girls standing together. Girl 1, "Do you know where your joints are?" Girl 2, "I don't smoke." Girl 1, confused AF. Girl 3, "Well, there's different kinds of joints." 7th grade biology teacher here. A kid once told me, "I want to eat your ass like I ate my mom's." I thought he was joking, but a few months later, he was taken away by CPS and his mother sent to jail for abusing him. I had a 6th grader that I was always razzing for never having his Chromebook charged. I was really a softie that always enabled him, and basically any other neglectful student, to charge it, otherwise they couldn't do work. One day he said, "X, you'll be proud. My mom had to get up at 4 a.m. to bail Dad out of jail and took us with her, so I remembered to charge my Chromebook before school." I wasn't disturbed exactly, but was grateful that I hadn't been too hard on him. I was definitely saddened, though. I have 2. The first was that we should all start doing cocaine to make it through finals. The second was that we should turn the children of immigrants into meat for American citizens. No one knows where my mom and dad are, or if they're even alive. Logan, a kid in a class I subbed for who was being raised by his grandmother. I taught at a girls' school overseas. We had girls from China, the Philippines, India, Nepal, Pakistan. One day I walked into my English class and I noticed one girl was missing. I asked if she was absent. Her fellow Pakistani friends had a plain look and said her dad came to get her. It was not uncommon for these kids to have a grandparent or relative pass away in the home country and they may be gone for a month. Anyways, after class I was down at the admin office and a secretary told me she would no longer be in my class. The vice principal was close by. She had an odd look on her face. I figured family was moving back to Pakistan. Later in the day I had the same class again for a substitution. I asked about X and if her family moved back home. One of the girls told me, "She's getting married." My eyes got big and I had to remain professional. I wanted to shout, "She's only barely 13." But couldn't. I just said, "Oh, I will miss her. She's a good kid." And I left it at that. You could see the look in the eyes of the Pakistani, Indian and even Nepalese girls. Like they were used to this happening even though they now lived in a very modern Chinese city and some were born were there. After lunch at the admin office again I spoke to the vice principal. She told me the school couldn't do anything, there was no legal way to stop the father removing the daughter from the school. To my American eyes that's a messed up thing. And I noticed how the older girls acted different. The Chinese, Indian and Filipina girls were getting more focused on studies after secondary school and public exams were important. But the Pakistani and Nepalese girls were less interested. Over time I learned their lives were going to be dictated to them. Not all of them. But most of them. It was hard to see. I'm a little late. I had a student who was deathly afraid of using the bathroom because monsters who wanted to get her were in the vents. Turns out her dad used to abuse her in the bathroom. Feels a little light compared to some in here, but, what's the point of empathy? Was one that made me stop in my tracks. This is the same student, HS, who said that the only reason to be nice to someone is because you want something from them. I had two students approach me after school. I was outside monitoring the kids leaving the building to walk home, and these two boys walked up and started telling me how cute I was as a baby. Being middle schoolers, I didn't take it super seriously at first, but asked what they were talking about. One of them showed me one of my baby pictures on his phone and proceeded to tell me my address and, at the time, fiancé's name. The assistant principal was nearby, so I called him over and had them repeat what they'd said. The information they had was not readily available with a quick Google search and I still don't know how they got it. One of the boys' father was a known higher-up in a local gang, so I was totally freaked out. The school took the stance of kids will be curious and it isn't a big deal. I talked to the police officer posted at the school and he told me I was well within my rights to press charges, but within 30 minutes of the conversation, the assistant superintendent was at my classroom door, informing me of how bad it would look on my evaluation and for potential future jobs if I pursued anything. I no longer work there, but I have never been more disturbed or scared. Not a teacher, but I heard a kid say if I had a family, I would eat them too. We were discussing cannibalism from a non-ethnocentric viewpoint and he was serious. Had a 6-year-old scream "I'm gonna cook you up and eat you" to the daycare director. He had a lot more outbursts like that, where he would go into specific details of how he would harm you. He was also obsessed with axes and knives, and would draw them constantly. His parents swear they didn't let him watch anything violent and had no idea where he was learning any of this. He was diagnosed as on the autism spectrum and the parents were getting him therapy and honestly seemed like they were trying to do their best. Last weekend I sent positive emails to the families of all of my students, because remote learning is hard and the kids are really stepping up. On Tuesday, when I saw one of my classes for the first time since sending the messages, a girl said to me, "That email you sent made my dad happy. He doesn't like me that much, and it made him like me." My heart broke for that poor girl. She's bright, friendly, and hard-working. I asked her, privately, if she was safe at home and if there was anything I could do to help. She told me her dad liked her brother much better. The fact that this entire page is filled with responses from children who have been through trauma because of shitty parents speaks for itself how much an unstable life at home affects who you are at school. Two come to mind. A student threatened to stab me. They found a knife on him later and he was expelled. Then I had a student who had an argument with a different group during work time and threatened to shoot them saying "I'm going to kill you tomorrow." Not to mention the almost yearly gun and bomb threats, especially the really detailed ones that drastically affect attendance. It's SHD like that which makes me roll my eyes when people say you teachers have it so easy. "Sorry mister, I'm gonna be out while I go to rehab." Obviously you hear about students using drugs and all that, but it disturbed me that it got to the point of abuse. Not from a student, and not from me but from a teacher friend, parent. "Oh, you can just hit her. I hit her all the time, it's fine. Just hit her." A 6-year-old barely getting out the words "my mama choked me" between tears. A second grader having a full meltdown about his low grades saying his dad was going to make him sleep outside again if he found out. These are some of the things that keep us up at night. Heartbreaking. Had a young girl, grade 5, that asked if she could come home with me for Christmas because she didn't want to be at home for the break. We knew her home life was rough because parents were in a gang. I tried my best to assure her that everything would be okay and that we loved her. I also tried to add that her family loved her in their own way too. She replied, "If they love me, why do they hit me?" Thankfully, we got her removed from the situation not long after, and every Christmas I think of her and hope she is doing alright. I shudder to think what would have happened to her if she had not been removed, as the stories about what was really happening were horrific. I had a student who was incredibly bright, loved history and loved to read about all kinds of things. He was absent for a week. When he came back I was helping get him caught up and asked him what was up. He told me, "Our washer was broken." He couldn't clean his uniform, his parents couldn't get it fixed right away and couldn't afford a laundromat, so he just didn't come to school for a week. A student in juvie once told me one of the reasons he kept coming back was, "It's the only place I had treated like a human being." That SHT hit me hard. My student recently told a story about how her dog died. She said she was stay with her aunt for a few weeks over the summer and her dog was home with her mom. When the student returned home, she asked for the dog. Mom said she didn't know where the dog was and told the student to look upstairs. The student found the dog dead in an unused bedroom. Mom's reaction was, "Oh, I guess I forgot to feed him." Student now lives with the aunt full-time because mom often forgot to feed the kid too. I was student teaching, so I was not actually a direct part of the proceedings. My mentor teacher handled the primary incident. Amy mentor had to call child services because of a concerning comment one of her little girls made regarding her living situation. At the time, she was living with mom, grandma, and a little brother. Mom was somewhat recently back in the picture after some issue. Possibly she was in jail. During the previous school year, grandma had custody of the children. I had met the mother at a support services meeting during the beginning of my placement and things seemed typical then. Well, they ended up in family court, either directly resulting from that call my mentor made or not, I don't know. The next day the little girl was in school. I overheard her telling one of her desk mates that mommy said it's my fault she can't stay with us no more. I don't know what the circumstances were and I didn't catch the first half of that girl's story. But it broke my heart to think that her mother must have had her visitations taken away, and instead of owning up to whatever her own problems were, she told her 7-year-old daughter that she was the cause of their troubles. Not a teacher, but my sister had a student punch her stomach when she was pregnant and said, "I'm gonna kill your baby." She works with special needs children. Teaching assistant in elementary school. 2nd grade student. Did you know if you break into a teacher's house and the cops find you, you're in trouble? His school photograph looked like a mugshot. His whole family is seriously sick. My parent is a teacher. Last week a student told her that his puppy died. Another student overheard and went over to his house and dug up the dead puppy. These are 8-year-olds. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in 8th grade my best friend at the time was heavily bullied by everyone. Except me. She meant the world to me. Anyway, it was not a pretty town. Small. One day in science class all hell broke loose and my friend had enough. There was a specific girl named Amber who was actually pretty cool, but she hung with the bullies and was sometimes a bully herself. She ticked off my friend that day badly and my friend said, "You know what, I don't care what you say, I'm going to grow up and become successful while you're going to amount to nothing and die in this town." Freshman year, Amber was crossing the street and got run over by a drunk driver. She was a vegetable and her family decided to pull the plug. It was horrible. I didn't think she was a terrible person, and even went to her wake. That was the first time I ever saw a dead body. It was someone that I had grown up with since I was a kid because of how small the town was. I remember once Amber told me she wanted to work in a mental health facility and take care of sick people. I really think she was just a kid running with the crowd, but in reality she brought a lot of people joy. I wished for a long time it was the other bullies, the real ones. I always remembered that day in science class because my friend was technically right. Years into my adulthood I ran into that friend of mine in a restaurant bathroom. I didn't recognize her. She was so beautiful, she always was. And she was working as a model. She traveled a lot and she even gave me a business card. When we hung out, I had so much fun with her and she lived in a huge house. She really did become successful. One day she just dropped me and I wished so bad that she would talk to me because I always considered her a sister. But anyway, she was right. I also always think about Amber for whatever reason. I just can't get out of my mind how everything took place in our lives and knowing that I once knew her as a kid. I'm going to bring my mom's gun and shoot you all. From the mouth of a 4-year-old. Still goes to the school. No consequences. Sigh. I work with at-risk youth. My students are amazing people 99% of the time. Circumstances can really ruin a life. One of my best students was in class on court order. My class or youth to prison. This smart, inquisitive, respectful, creative young 16-year-old guy had robbed a younger 11-year-old kid at gunpoint from the back of a bicycle. Because his friend wanted the money. This kid had a gift for science, so I was able to help him graduate with a deep interest in astronomy. But if I didn't have to sit down after that shift for a while and think about how awful his life would have been had it not been for a really lenient judge and his friend, also at risk, also there by court order for dealing opiates at the high school, asking on a whim about aliens one day in class. Young man. I'm always rooting for you. I'm not a teacher, but in one of my classes in high school, one of the kids who used to be kinda unpopular tried to impress the cool kids while our teacher went out to fetch a few markers or something, I can't exactly remember, from the neighboring teacher. He went on and on about how he'd be able to smash the teacher, as he came to the part of his fantasy story where he told the others that he would stick a post-it note over the classroom camera and nail her in the middle of the classroom. The teacher walked back into class without him realizing. He wasn't the best at that subject, so the only things he fucked in that class were his grades. If this school allowed violence, there'd be a lot of body bags coming from the silent creepy kid who fit every description of your typical school shooter. The rest of the semester with him was fun. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.